So, I started working at this new nightclub, Shades, for the first time. It was a bit of a shady place, no pun intended, but the pay was good, and I needed the money. My shift started at 8 p.m., and I was supposed to be done by 3 a.m. Everything was going good until after midnight when I was about to close up. That's when things got real weird. Shades is one of those places that's always packed. The music's loud, the lights are low, and people just let loose. I was behind the bar, serving drinks and trying to keep up with the orders. My boss, Rick, had shown me the ropes earlier, so I felt pretty confident. I was making cocktails, pulling beers, and even doing a bit of flair bartending to entertain the crowd. People seemed to like it, and I was getting some good tips. Around midnight, things started to slow down a bit. Some folks were already too drunk to keep going, and others were heading out to continue their night elsewhere. That's when this guy walked in. He looked normal enough at first, just another customer, but there was something off about him. He had this intense look in his eyes, like he was looking for someone. He came straight to the bar and ordered a whiskey neat. I served him his drink and he just stood there, staring at me for a moment before he finally took a sip. "You new here?" he asked. "Yeah, first night," I replied, trying to keep it casual. He nodded, took another sip, and then started scanning the room. I went back to my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept coming back to the bar, ordering the same drink, and just standing there watching. After a while, he disappeared into the crowd. Around 1:30 a.m., the club started to clear out more. I was cleaning up behind the bar when I noticed the same guy talking to a group of people in a corner. They looked like they were having a serious conversation. One of them, a girl, looked really uncomfortable. She was shaking her head, and the guy was getting more and more agitated. Rick came up to me and said, "Jake, keep an eye on that group over there. I don't like the look of it." I nodded, and we both kept watching. The guy got more aggressive, and the girl looked like she was about to cry. I saw him grab her arm, and she tried to pull away. That was it for me. I told Rick I was going to step in. I walked over to them, trying to stay calm. "Hey, is everything okay here?" I asked. The guy glared at me. "Mind your own business," he snapped. The girl looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. "Please, I just want to leave," she said. I took a deep breath and stood my ground. "Look, if she wants to go, she should be able to go. Let her go, man." The guy let out a frustrated growl, but let go of her arm. She quickly moved away from him and towards the door. I followed her to make sure she got out safely. Once she was outside, she thanked me and hurried off into the night. I went back inside, but the guy was gone. I felt a bit uneasy, but tried to shake it off. The rest of the night went by without any more incidents, and by 2:45 a.m. the club was pretty much empty. I started cleaning up, wiping down the bar, and putting away the glasses. Rick came up to me again. "You did good tonight, Jake. Thanks for stepping in earlier." "No problem," I said. "Just glad she's okay." Rick nodded and went to lock up the back office. I finished up and was about to leave when I noticed a piece of paper on the bar. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a note, written in messy handwriting. It said, "You should have minded your own business. This isn't over." My heart started racing. I looked around, but the club was empty. I didn't know what to do. I quickly grabbed my stuff and headed for the door. My car was parked a few blocks away and the streets were quiet. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. As I walked, I heard footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps got faster too. I turned a corner and broke into a run. I could hear someone running after me. I made it to my car, fumbling with my keys, and finally got the door open. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove off, my heart pounding. I didn't stop until I was a few miles away. I pulled over and tried to calm down. I didn't know who that guy was or what he wanted, but I knew I had to make sure I made it out safe. I never went back to Shades nightclub. I quit the next day and found a different job. But I still think about that night sometimes, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stepped in. I'll never forget the look in that guy's eyes or the fear in that girl's voice. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, and the airport was buzzing with the usual crowd of travelers. People were rushing to catch their flights, dragging their suitcases behind them, while others stood in line, waiting to check in. The air was filled with a mix of excitement and stress, which is pretty normal for an airport. I was stationed at the check-in area, scanning the crowd for anything unusual. My job was to keep an eye on everyone and make sure nothing suspicious was going on. It was a pretty routine day until I noticed this one guy standing in line. He looked out of place. He was wearing a heavy coat even though it was warm inside, and he kept fidgeting with his bag. He seemed really nervous, constantly looking around like he was waiting for something or someone. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him just felt off. I watched him for a while, trying to figure out what was making me so uneasy. He was in his mid-30s with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. His bag was a large, old-fashioned duffel, and he held on to it tightly. It was almost like he didn't want to let it out of his sight. I decided to keep an eye on him. As he got closer to the front of the line, his nervous behavior became more noticeable. He started sweating, and his hands were shaking. I knew I had to do something, so I called over my colleague, Mike, and told him about the guy. Mike agreed that something was weird about him, so we decided to approach him. We walked over casually, not wanting to alarm anyone. When we got to him, I asked, "Excuse me, sir, is everything all right?" He jumped a little and looked at us with wide eyes. Yes, everything's fine," he stammered, but his voice was shaky and he avoided making eye contact. I nodded and tried to keep my tone calm. "Would you mind if we take a look at your bag? It's just a routine check." His reaction was immediate. He clutched the bag to his chest and said, "No, there's no need for that. I'm in a hurry. My flight is about to board." Mike and I exchanged a glance. This was definitely not normal behavior. "Sir, it's just a quick check. It won't take long," I insisted. He looked around, clearly panicking now. "I can't miss my flight. Please just let me go." At this point, other passengers were starting to notice the commotion. We couldn't let him leave without checking the bag, so I said, "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to escort you to the security office." He looked like he was about to bolt, but Mike and I were ready. We each took a step closer and he finally relented, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered, "but be careful with it." We guided him to a nearby table and asked him to place the bag down. He did so reluctantly, and I could see he was sweating even more now. I unzipped the bag slowly, half expecting something terrible. Inside, there were clothes and some personal items, but as I dug deeper, I found a small metal box. It was locked, and the guy's face turned pale when I pulled it out. "What's in the box?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing important," he said quickly. "Just some personal stuff." I wasn't buying it. "Sir, we're going to need to open this." He started shaking his head vigorously. "No, you can't. It's private." I glanced at Mike, and he nodded. We had no choice. I took out my multi-tool and started working on the lock. The guy was visibly trembling now, and I could tell he was on the verge of losing it. Finally, the lock clicked open. I took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside, there were several small bags filled with a white powder. My heart sank. This was bad. "Sir, you're under arrest," Mike said, moving quickly to cuff him. The guy didn't resist. He just looked defeated. We called for backup, and soon the airport police arrived to take him into custody. They thanked us for our vigilance, and we handed over the evidence. It turned out the white powder was indeed a controlled substance, and the guy was trying to smuggle it onto the plane. After everything was over, I sat down, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the image of that guy's terrified face. I realized how close he had come to getting on that plane with who knows what intentions. I had to make sure he didn't make it on the plane, and I'm glad I trusted my instincts. It was a reminder that you never know what people are capable of, and sometimes you have to step in to prevent something terrible from happening.